Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. I want to spend some time today talking about uncertainty because uncertainty is really up in the air right now. Many of us are navigating periods of really intense existential uncertainty. Those of you listening may be people who are individually geared towards these big questions in your own life. You might have been grappling with the question of, who am I? What am I here to do? How do I honor the reality that I am part of this larger cosmic family that includes the planets, that includes the non-human world, the plants, the animals, the earth itself? You may be no stranger to these questions, and at the same time, you might have noticed that the intensity with which the collective is asking these questions have amplified to a degree that is so unprecedented. And I don't think I'm being exaggerating here, because what we're looking at as we are gazing at the collective question, there is this huge question about work and the function of our vocation in a world that seems to be changing extremely rapidly. Some of us may find ourselves waking up in the middle of the night wondering if the skills and the perspectives that we learned throughout however many decades that we've been alive, can they bring us safely through the next 5 years, which is extreme, right? We are seeing such rapid change in technological advancements and the way that it's being presented to us that makes us start to question a lot about our existence. There's a huge question hanging above all of our heads about whether this version of us right now will even have any relevance, or if everything will change, whether replaced by machines or we will adapt to the point where we will look back at this moment and not even recognize ourselves. We experience uncertainty about our relationships with one another, the agreements, the contracts, the ways that we relate to one another. Right before our very eyes, we're seeing possibilities emerging in terms of how to bond with one another that can feel so different from whatever we were taught, from whatever was considered appropriate or even allowed. And although technically so much of this is an expansion, there really are consciousness deepening and also our spirits being allowed to express on an individual level through our embodied experiences to a degree that has never possibly been allowed before, there's also a sense of unrest. We no longer know how to relate to one another. A theme that I'm seeing a lot kind of in the collective, but also in a lot of conversations that I have, is the question of how to even consider each other's functions within social groups that used to have a really clear sense of rules. We used to know how to relate to family members, and now we are becoming more aware of all of the ways that we might be treated in less than ideal ways, in ways that don't really honor our individual desires and individual uniqueness. And we see a kind of rupture start to happen. We no longer want to adhere to these ways of being that have actually never truly nourished us, but in the past we held on to them because they helped us stay together. They helped us cohere, right? And even the idea of coherence, I'm finding myself talking to people, especially people I just met, when I go to new settings that I don't usually find myself in. When I talk to people, I find that there's this question of, is this person even going to be living in the same reality as I am? Because we live in such a specific algorithmic world that there is the option to only receive information or, in the form of music or news that reinforce our beliefs and reinforce our interests. And while that process has been going on for some time, the level at which it is becoming more and more narrow is shocking. And on some level, I think many of us feel that there's more space. There's actually more truth because we no longer are relating to each other as these projected holograms of roles, responsibilities, duties. And there's something really incredible about that. And it can also feel really threatening to the stability of our social bonds. It's threatening because, on some level, liberation always carries with it an element of instability. Liberation carries the possibility of things going sideways, things feeling totally unpredictable, going off the rails, and we are left with a lot of confusion about how to even address each other. We also experience uncertainty about where things are heading for us as a collective, as citizens of planet Earth, as a species, as sentient beings who are doing what we can to figure out how to be with ourselves, how to be with each other, how to be with the non-human world. Many of us look to our political or organizational leaders by default as people who know where they're going. This is how we've been taught to relate to the world to a certain extent. And we are now looking at them, and it feels almost impossible not to see that there are huge gaps between their skills or their temperaments, their characters, and the world that we would like to move towards. The world we know we need to move towards in order to ensure not just our survival, but to continue moving in the direction of thriving. And depending on your current lived circumstances, there can be a degree of intensity around this experience. I was just talking to a friend the other day about how the current state of the world and everything that's going on politically in many, many countries feel like a reenactment of chaotic household dynamics. This friend grew up in a house where the adults really didn't have it all figured out. I mean, nobody had it figured out, but for this person specifically, it was chaotic. And all the adults were running around trying to troubleshoot or in a state of freeze, not knowing how to get everybody out of this mess that they've created. And my friend confessed to feeling extremely activated by the state of the world. And I don't think it's just this person, right? Like so many of us on some level, whether very much at the top of the surface or deep down, is feeling this, right? Is feeling that sense of chaos, whether that's from our childhood upbringing or maybe that's from our school environment, is kind of being recreated over and over again, but at a larger scale. And there can be a sense of disappointment and dysregulation and confusion. There can be a sense that all the things that we've put our trust in are now no longer working for us. And everything that we used to experience, this fear, this disappointment, this anxiety, growing up when we were not able to really fend for ourselves, all of that is even more amplified now. There's a kind of dissolution that many of us can sense is happening at a really accelerated rate around what it means to be alive as humans at this time. To me, this moment is really existential, more so than anything. And this is perhaps one way to look at it, is that we are growing up. As a collective, we are all growing up. I want to read you a passage from this book that I'm currently reading. It's called Quarter Life. And this passage is really, it kind of jumped out at me. And I think it's really relevant to this moment. True adulthood is psychological. It is not about gaining stability or acting a part. It is not about procreation or mortgage, nor is it about adhering to personal ideologies and meaning that defy the ability to live in the world. True psychological adulthood is a kind of maturity that is about balance, a dynamic play between being part of a community and a conscious individual too. It is about finding one's way toward both stability and meaning, like a union between order and chaos, civilization and nature, or one's humanness and one's divinity. It is a symbiotic relationship in which the two parts of oneself each have a distinct role to play, like a surfboard for the ocean waves, a fireplace for fire, or a goblet for wine. And when we see what is currently moving through us as a collective body, this uncertainty and the potential anxiety and fear and freeze and flight and avoidance that arises from this uncertainty, we can see that as a collective, we are moving towards the next phase of our adulting. And to me, maybe this goes beyond adulting. This actually, as a collective, I feel like we are maturing and perhaps even starting to reach a kind of elderhood, a kind of search towards what it means to be a wise adult who has moved through these situations. If we zero in on even work itself, work is always evolving for us as human beings, but specifically in this moment in time, we are seeing technologies outpacing us in terms of being able to think and being able to generate conclusions, synthesis. And there's something unsettling about that because we have been identified with that. I'm getting this imagery as I'm speaking of someone who is nearing the age of retirement. I've seen this with colleagues, with clients, where there can be resistance towards allowing oneself to step into a chapter where it's less about doing and more about being. That transition can be quite rough because it shows us the gap. It shows us where we haven't fully been conscious in the ways that we are being. We haven't been fully conscious in how we orient towards life. And we kind of gloss it over with a lot of doing. We stay busy so that we don't have to feel the uncomfortable existential questions arising. And for those of you listening who are, as individuals, no stranger to this kind of questioning, you might find yourself in a moment of feeling heightened intensity, because not only are you holding these questions about who you are as an individual, but you're also feeling the impact energetically of everybody else asking who they are now. And there's kind of a there used to be less of us asking this question, and we were more of an exclusive club. And now so many more people are entering the party. So many more people are entering this existential questioning. And for those people who haven't been on an individual level asking these questions deeply, they are reacting in ways that almost feel like they're having an allergic reaction, And while we have been sitting with our individual questions for some time and we know how to be with our questioning, it's a different story altogether when we see everybody around us kind of freaking out too. And we can have all kinds of experience around this. We can have the experience of being annoyed. We can sometimes feel deep compassion. We can sometimes feel confused because here's this person who never asked anything about their own lives, and suddenly, they're going out there and they're seeking teachings, and they're maybe finding teachings that are not as nourishing for them, and you can see that happening, unfolding before your very eyes. People are finding guidance that are misplaced, guidance that are actually unhelpful, maybe even damaging for their wellness, for them being able to approach their life with grace and ease. And this is a kind of litmus test that I like to use for myself, but also for people that I work with, right? Even though it's not a smooth sailing all the time, there's a way in which when we interact with teachings that are actually helpful for us, that you can see the person exhaling. There's a kind of relief that happens, because this is what it feels like to come back to our true nature. Now, don't get me wrong. There's many points on the path of coming home to ourselves, of remembering our true nature. And some of these points will look quite activating. We may experience confusion. We may experience a kind of dark night of the soul. All of that is certainly part of the path. But you can tell when something is actually bad for you because the system energetically starts to have an allergic reaction, right? It's like when someone is lactose intolerant and they drink milk. You can see that it's not agreeing with their system. And you, as the lighthouse of consciousness, awareness, spiritual maturity in your own way, you might be experiencing this heightened sensation of feeling responsible for those around you who are not yet at your level, who are not yet at a moment where they have your level of discernment, your level of maturity around what is correct for them and what is not. And for all of us, it feels like the ground beneath us is shifting. What was once a solid marble tower is now beginning to erode at its core, at its foundation. That everything is feeling more and more like trying to build a house in a quicksand. So the question I want to contemplate for all of us today is, how do we cultivate inner spaciousness in the heart of uncertainty? And before we get to the how, let's consider for a second, what does spaciousness even mean when we are looking at this evolutionary moment we're currently in? When I am personally moving through periods of deep uncertainty, the word spaciousness is certainly not one that even crosses my mind most of the time, truly and honestly. A few days ago, I heard news about a dear person in my life, and they were moving through a particular health challenge, and it didn't sound that great. And my first response was immediately, what can I do? Is there more information I can try to gather? Can I help this person in some shape or form? Does this person have the resources that they need? I was moving in a million different directions. And I think all of those responses are absolutely appropriate, right? They're warranted. But also, once the situation passed, I had this moment of realizing my own orientation. And I found myself wondering with a lot of openness and curiosity, why was that my first reaction? Why did I go straight into thinking I need to do something in order to help the other person? Is that impulse driven by a genuine, intelligent response to the situation? Or is it my social conditioning around being useful and responsible? In other words, is it my old programming that led me to have those responses? Now, we don't ever really get to fully know the answers to these questions, but I think the questions themselves are worth asking, because so much of what we create and what we recreate in our reality are things that we animate using our life force. So many of the way that we operate, especially as human beings within, quote, civilization, are really socially agreed upon rules. And these rules are animated by our energy. They don't sort of uphold themselves. They themselves are simply thought forms. But we animate them through collective agreement and also through the ways that we've been conditioned and educated. We were taught this is how to be in order to ensure a kind of functioning society. And as everything is kind of dissolving in this quicksand moment, there can be a sense of, I don't even know what I'm supposed to uphold anymore, right? Even for those of us who have been asking the questions for a long time, it is just as destabilizing. Maybe we're more practiced at being with our own experience, but we don't know. It is my sense that spaciousness is actually our true nature. I want you to engage in a little experiment as you're listening to my voice here. I want you to find an object in your environment that you can gaze at, that you can stare at for a few moments. And please do so consciously and responsibly. If you are driving or operating heavy machineries, let yourself not zone out, but maybe stop for a second and pull over or stop working and just for a few seconds here, bring your full attention to this object. And once you find your attention fully being in this object, I want you to allow yourself, using your imagination, to enter this object fully. Imagine with your awareness, your consciousness, as if you and this object are one. There's no more space, no more separation between you and this object. In front of me is this little cup. So as I'm staring at this cup, I'm trying to imagine as if I were the cup and the cup were me. And as you relax into this prompt, as you stop trying to make the merging happen with your analytical mind, you will find that it's actually quite easy. You might even find yourself looking at this object and noticing details you haven't noticed before. I'm looking at this cup and the decoration, and I'm thinking, wow, that's really beautiful. Notice how easy and how hard that feels. And then, would you allow your consciousness to step back? Now do almost the exact opposite. Begin noticing the space between you and this object. Between your physical body, your eyes, and this object. Really pay attention to this distance. Notice your body and this object as two separate objects, and that all the space exists between you and the object. Isn't that fascinating? How our consciousness, our imagination, can have such wildly different experiences from shifting our attention. Spaciousness to me feels like this distance. Not the distance between you and the object, but the kind of distance that you are able to access when you toggle back and forth. To me, that's spaciousness. There's space to breathe because you know that you can kind of lean in and zoom out. Spaciousness is really a kind of perceptual switch that we have within our consciousness. And it's kind of an inside job. It's really kind of up to us and how we calibrate our consciousness to be able to sense and feel the spaciousness and then really allow ourselves to experience that spaciousness. In other words, spaciousness is at least partially an inner job. It's an inner discipline that one must engage in. But the engagement that allows spaciousness is actually the opposite of the kind of muscling or efforting engagement that so many of us are habituated into in this day and age. It's really more a kind of allowing. We experience spaciousness in our bodies when we allow our gaze to soften, our shoulders to drop, our necks to be a little supple, our breath to not be held back. We feel spaciousness in our relationships when we stop trying to enforce expectations and rules about how we should be or how other people should be. We feel spaciousness in our work when we give ourselves permission to fully be present with what's in front of us, the task at hand, the job we currently have, the interests we currently have, rather than trying to figure out and plan ahead for all the eventualities that we can't control, the possibilities that are endless. We feel spacious when we choose, the operative word being choose here, because we are really exercising the power of choice, to listen to the guidance of our spirit about the right next steps. Not for the next 5 years, not for the next 10 years, but just the right next step. We feel spaciousness in how we relate to the human world when we allow ourselves to pay attention to what is happening and what is unfolding, but simultaneously recognize that there's a deeper cycle at play. And the deeper cycle at play isn't just the deep sense of time, right? Which I think is so beautiful to connect with those of us who are, contemplative, who are mystical in our leaning. We know how beautiful it is to be in that deep time sensation, right? But also, the deeper cycle is at play right in front of us. I think a great example is the news, right? We know as we're watching the news or as we're reading the news that not everything gets reported. There is a kind of selection process that happens, and some of those selection processes are sometimes economically motivated, politically motivated, that we don't hear about the young person helping another person who is more mature in age, who has a harder time crossing the street. We don't hear about that intergenerational love between strangers and care. That doesn't make it to the news, right? So many breakthroughs that happen through advancement of technology doesn't get reported or doesn't get the attention because it doesn't feel catastrophic. We are simply in this anxiety loop about, are we going to be replaced? Are we even going to be relevant? Which again is a sign that we are actually maturing, that we're actually being asked to prepare ourselves for a different way of being. Perhaps a way of being that has the potential to become more spacious, to allow us to really be with our own spirit, rather than consistently running around trying to survive. I remember some tasks that used to take me a long time, even 3 years ago, are now that much more streamlined because technology has changed. And maybe we're allowed to finally take a step back and really, as a collective, ask ourselves, where do we want to go next? Instead of continuing to perpetuate this cycle of working nonstop without really thinking about what we're even working on. When we tune in to that cycle, even though we may not fully understand what the cycle is about or where it's leading us towards, when we're aware that there's a deeper cycle at play, we can open up the possibility of being in conversation. From that spaciousness, from that willingness to listen, what comes forth are sincere, genuine, spontaneous responses to life. It's important to recognize and to honor spontaneity. Nature herself is spontaneous. When you see rainfall, for example, you see how nature is not trying to hold back when rain is ready to fall. Nobody ever really knows when the rain is ready. right? When there's enough accumulation in the clouds to turn into rainfall. Nobody really knows. But it happens. And there is a kind of spontaneity, a pattern spontaneity. When you see animals or plants, you see that they know precisely when to hibernate, when to come back to life, when to mate, when to die. They don't walk around carrying a planner. They certainly don't, right? Instead, they naturally allow space, and from that space, their bodies become a conduit, become a vessel for life to find a path through them. Life moving in all directions. It's so powerful and so moving to watch nature, really. Because when you pay close attention to nature, even if you were in an urban setting, you can't escape nature. When you look at nature and when you pay attention, you can really see that life moves through us. Life isn't something we have to meticulously manage because life moves through us spontaneously. It has its own intelligence. The question is, are you allowing yourself to be marveling at the ways that your being knows how to allow life's intelligence to move through it? One way to look at spaciousness is that spaciousness is about having enough of a buffer on the physical, emotional, energetic, mental plane that enables resisting that compulsion to push past what we're sincerely inspired to do, what we're sincerely inspired to be, or to say in the moment. So let me say that one more time. Spaciousness is about having enough buffer on a physical, emotional, energetic, mental plane. And that buffer is what allows us to not rush towards that compulsion, to push past what naturally wants to arise or what isn't actually here. Because that compulsion sometimes makes it feel like there is something when there's no thing, quite literally. Earlier, when I was meditating on the idea of finding spaciousness in uncertainty, what I saw in my mind's eye was this image of a plant in full bloom. Inside of the plant, there's pollen getting ready to be dispersed, to be disseminated. And of course, as we know, when a plant is in full bloom, that signifies that soon it will wilt. The plant will die, or the flower will die. The flower will lose its glorious bloom. And at the same time, the pollen is a kind of promise that life continues, that life finds a way, even if what will bloom again is not the same flower, is not the exact same flower. The essence of that flower will find a way to continue existence. Existence doesn't stop just because a flower wilts. Existence proliferates, it moves. I'm recording this message during a week that is extremely mercurial. We have Mercury meeting with the Sun in Taurus, a fixed earth sign, and then Mercury moves into Gemini, which is its own home sign, and making a conjunction with Uranus in Gemini. Mercury is archetypally the principle of dispersion. Mercury is the messenger. Mercury is the magician. And with dispersion, there's uncertainty. With magic, there's uncertainty. Mercury teaches us that uncertainty cannot exist actually without spaciousness. When we think about uncertainty as a phenomenon, uncertainty is inherently unstable. The definition of uncertainty is that things can go in one direction, or it can go in the opposite direction, or maybe it can go in a completely different direction. Uncertainty can only exist when there is literally no single outcome that has 100% possibility of happening. So we can work with this. Here's my current favorite path to creating spaciousness when there's uncertainty. Whenever I think of a situation that's giving me anxiety or nervousness because it is uncertain, I give myself a little reality check. First, I acknowledge my own experience. I am nervous. I am feeling anxious. I'm feeling grief or rage. That's sometimes outside of the present moment. Sometimes it is true frustration that is happening in the moment. And I allow myself to have that experience in the moment. Usually, when I let myself have that experience, ultimately the emotional experience starts to wane, and then a question begins to arise. Let's say, for example, the question that arises is, what if this path that I'm choosing for my life, what if it doesn't work out? And I have been really enjoying working with these questions and these questionings, and to really take them seriously. Not from a place of anxiety or pessimism or a kind of doomsday orientation, but from a place of, if I were a teacher, right, a really wise elder or a wise mentor, and I'm sitting across from someone who is very concerned and nervous about their life, and they are wondering if the choice that they're making will work out, I will actually take this question seriously. I will try to create an open, curious space for this person to be able to try to answer that question. Instead of asking the question of, what if this path doesn't work out? We can ask the question from a completely different orientation of, what if this path doesn't work out? What will happen next? Maybe then you will have to move out of your current living situation because maybe you won't be able to afford it anymore. Okay, so then where would you like to move? Is there a place that you've been curious about? Is there a place somewhere in the world you would like to move to? Is there another path that you would like to try walking on? Is there a new adventure that you would like to embark? Is there a new interest that you would like to pursue? Is there an experience you would like to try? I hope you see where I'm going here, because that uncertainty is not separate from spaciousness. They're two sides of the same coin. What often gets in the way of us being able to see that spaciousness and uncertainty are inextricably linked is when we get caught up in the blame game. We blame ourselves for not being able to fix the uncertainty or the discomfort that comes from the perceived uncertainty. We blame circumstances for not giving us what we want, which is really a reflection of our expectations, right? When circumstances don't give us what we want, that means there is something that we want. And that's okay. It's great to have things that we want. They help us move towards something. And also, when we hold that as a rigid expectation, often that feels harsh. That gets in the way of us being in the flow and being in conversation with what is. Or maybe we blame people around us for making us feel uncomfortable, for choosing a path that's not yet clear. Because people get nervous, when you choose something that looks shaky, people are trying to help you. And it may come from good intention. But when we get stuck in that blaming, that's challenging because we are, in effect, not just blaming other people, we're also blaming ourselves. Because on an energetic level, we are so connected. So I will leave you with that. I will leave you with this invitation of what if you take this question seriously? What if whatever it is that feels uncertain, that feels unresolved in your heart, what if you allow yourself to sit with your imagination? Instead of relying on your mental capacity for figuring out the one exact solution, which frankly never really exists. There is what is so beautiful and potentially maddening about life is that there's no one right answer to anything. And that can be scary for the thinking mind. And also, it's really exciting for the imagination. If there's no one right answer, there are many worlds existing, coexisting at the same time. There are many realities to choose from. There are many responses that are available to you. How wonderful. I want you to play with that. I want you to allow yourself to be playful with your own uncertainty. And I would be really curious to hear how this goes. If you feel like sharing your experience, you can leave a comment. If your podcast app allows that, you can leave a review on Apple Podcast or a comment on Spotify. You can leave a comment if you are listening to this on Substack. You can share it on social media. I read all the messages. And for those of you who would like to take this a step deeper and really delve into these bigger questions through the lens of your own personal experience, your current state, where you're currently at in life, I have some space in my guidance practice, and I would like to be of service, and I would like to continue going deeper. If you would like to work one-on-one with me, and reach out. We can certainly talk about what that looks like. I want you to practice being flexible. Imagine yourself as this jellyfish. Jellyfish are some of the oldest creatures, and they don't have a spine. What allows them to continue surviving as a species is their lack of rigidity, their ability to take in their environment. Jellyfish literally takes in the water around them and pumps it out, right, in order to move. There's something so cool about that. And I want you to pay attention to areas in your life where you're not allowing yourself to have that experience of being a jellyfish. All right. So much love to you. I'm sending you all the blessings, all the good energy amidst this amazing time of transformation that we are living in. Thank you. I'm sending you so much love. Take care.